The South Island of New Zealand is roughly the same size as England, with about 1/10 of the population. Most of that population lives in Christchurch and a handful of coastal cities. The rest of the island, the mountains, the gorges, the west coast, the fjords, is largely empty in a way that disguises what it used to be. Because for about a century, starting in the 1860s, parts of this island held some of the most densely settled frontier communities in the world. Gold towns, coal towns, mining settlements so remote they had to build their own hospitals, their own schools, their own newspapers. And then, one by one, they closed. On this list, 2 gold rush towns at the southwestern tip of the country, reachable only by boat or helicopter, where a rhododendron from an 1890s hotel has been growing wild for over 100 years with nobody around to see it. A mine explosion that left 186 children without fathers and effectively created the New Zealand labor movement. And at number 1, a town of 600 people that ceased to exist within 3 months of a single morning, where the dinner tables are still set for a meal that was never eaten. These are the 12 ghost towns on the South Island you're not supposed to know about. Number 12, Canvastown, the town that was always a tent. In April 1864, gold was confirmed payable in the Wakamarina Valley in Marlborough, near the top of the South Island. Within weeks, miners arrived by the thousands. The problem was that there was nowhere to put them. No town, no infrastructure, nothing. So they put up tents. The whole settlement was canvas, which is how it got its name, and the name stuck, even after the gold was gone and the tents came down. In the first year alone, around 25,000 ounces of gold came out of the valley. Then, the alluvial deposits ran shallow. Most miners moved on to the newer West Coast goldfields. The rush that had taken weeks to arrive was essentially over in 12 months. Today, if you drive west from Havelock on State Highway 6, you will pass a small hotel, a shop, a church, and a few scattered houses. Blink and you miss it. A company proposed an open-pit mine adjacent to the town in 2017. Locals pushed back. Some stories never quite end. They just quiet down. Number 11, Welshtown, the Welsh pub at the end of nowhere. 20 minutes north of Cromwell, on a gravel road in the Dunstan Mountains, the valley floor falls away behind you, and you climb onto a dry, windswept plateau. Tussock everywhere, views toward the Pisa Range, and then, scattered across the hillside, stone walls, dozens of them, cottages with no roofs. Welsh and other European miners moved into this remote landscape following the 1864 gold rush. By the 1870s, they had shifted to quartz mining and built proper settlements, Welshtown on the ridge, Logantown below. The Matilda Battery at the base of the hill once ran 20 stampers, one of the largest quartz crushing operations in the country. The quartz loads ran out by the mid-1880s. The miners left. The stone walls stayed. The Bendigo Historic Reserve is one of 20 DOC-managed goldfield sites across Otago. Wilderness Magazine describes the stone hut remains at Welshtown as among the best preserved in the region. Down in the ruins of the lower slope, there's a pub, or rather, what's left of one. The Pengally's Hotel, a good Welsh name, still sits in fragments in the grass, built for men who came from the other side of the earth and never came back. Number 10, Addison's Flat, the town that forgot its founder. On 18 May 1867, a telegraph message went out across New Zealand announcing a gold strike on the west coast, about 8 miles south of Westport. The man who had made the discovery was named Addison, an African-American prospector, recorded as such in the Te Ara Encyclopedia of New Zealand. The place was named after him immediately. Within weeks, more than 5,000 people were on the flat. Miners from Hokitika, the Grey River, Otago, Nelson, Australia. At its peak, the town reportedly had 40 licensed liquor outlets, 40, for roughly 5,000 people, which suggests that Addison's Flat was less a functioning settlement and more a very large, loosely organized event that occasionally involved mining. The alluvial gold was shallow. Within a few years, most people were gone. The bush reclaimed the flat completely. Today there is no marker, no ruin, nothing on the surface to indicate this place ever existed. The ghost is the name on the old maps. An African-American man sparked the New Zealand boomtown, gave it his name, and history nearly erased both of them. Number 9, the Arrowtown Chinese Settlement. the village that wasn't allowed to exist. 200 meters from Arrowtown's main street, along the banks of a creek, there are small dark huts built into schist rock cliffs, mud brick, stone, low-ceilinged and genuinely claustrophobic. In autumn, golden poplars frame them. That helps. When the first Otago gold rush faded in 1865, the provincial government invited Chinese miners from Victoria, Australia, to continue working ground that European prospectors had abandoned. By 1881, there were 5,004 Chinese residents in Otago. Of those, only 9 were women. In Arrowtown, they were not permitted to live in the town itself. They were assigned to the creek, at the edge of things, out of sight. By 1885, the settlement had roughly 10 huts, 2 stores, and a large social hall. The last occupant, a shopkeeper named Ah Lum, died in 1925. His store is a Heritage New Zealand Category I listed building, the only substantially intact original Chinese store remaining in Otago. A discriminatory poll tax on Chinese New Zealanders was not repealed until 1944. In 2002, the New Zealand government formally apologized to the Chinese community. The physical distance between the settlement and the European town was 200 meters. In every other sense, it was much further than that. Number 8. St. Bathans, the 7-person town with a blue lake and a ghost. There used to be a hill here, a 120-meter hill called Kildare Hill, which the Kildare Mining Company spent decades systematically destroying. They turned water cannons on it. They used hydraulic excavators. They washed the hill into sluice boxes and sifted the quartz for gold. They stopped in 1934 only when engineers calculated that continued mining would undermine the town itself. The pit filled with rainwater. Minerals from the surrounding quartz turned it an improbable turquoise blue. It is now a swimming lake. At its peak in the 1800 tactics, St. Bathans had over 2,000 miners and 13 hotels. Today, there are roughly 7 permanent residents and 1 hotel, the Vulcan Hotel, built in 1882 of mud brick, registered as a Category 1 historic place. Room 1 is reputedly the most haunted room in New Zealand. A young woman known as the Rose was reportedly strangled there in the 1880s. She targets male guests. Multiple visitors over many years have reported being pressed into their beds in the dark. A television film crew encountered something they couldn't explain and abandoned their shoot without finishing. In 2006, scientists found fossilized evidence of a previously unknown mammal in the geological layers near the town, proof that New Zealand had land mammals other than bats some 16 to 19 million years ago. The post office is still open. 7 people have apparently decided that a vanished hill, a haunted hotel, and prehistoric mammals are a reasonable neighborhood. Number 7. Macetown. 1 mayor, 0 citizens. From Arrowtown, the road to Macetown runs 15 kilometers up the Arrow River Valley. It crosses the river and its tributary creeks 23 times. There is no bridge. Standard cars are prohibited. You go on foot, by bike, on horseback, or by 4WD, and only if the river cooperates. William Fox found gold on the Arrow River in 1862. Within months, over 1,500 miners were camped in the valley. The town was named after 3 brothers, John, Charles, and Harry Mace, who were among the first to stake claims. At its height, Macetown had a school, a church, and 2 hotels. A group of miners, known as the 12 Apostles, became locally famous for spending every penny they earned on gambling and alcohol. The alluvial gold was largely exhausted within 3 years. Approximately 25 miners died in flash floods caused by a single period of heavy rain. The river that made the town rich also repeatedly tried to end it. Here's the thing about Macetown. By 1921, 1 person was left, a man named William Jenkins. He formally declared himself mayor of the empty town. 1 resident. Self-appointed mayor, presiding over nothing but his own company. Doc has restored the old bakehouse and the schoolmaster's house. The Arrow River is unchanged. You still have to cross it 23 times to get there if it lets you. If you're enjoying this so far, drop a comment below. The entries from here on didn't just fade. Number 6. Lyell. The most inaccessible goldfield in New Zealand. The gold rush at Lyell began in 1862, when Maori prospectors found payable deposits in Lyell Creek in the Buller Gorge. Early residents called it the most inaccessible goldfield in New Zealand. That was not poetic license. For much of its early history, the only viable route in was by canoe up the Buller River Rapids, and even skilled canoeists found it punishing. The town was named by geologist Julius von Haast after a Scottish geologist whose writing had influenced Charles Darwin. Lisle eventually had two local newspapers, banks, hotels, and churches. Italian miners Antonio Zala and Giorgio Zanetti discovered gold-bearing quartz veins in 1869. The resulting reef was worked from 1872 until 1912. Then the disasters arrived in sequence. In 1896, the water supply failed and 18 buildings burned. The easy gold was already gone. Rebuilding made little sense. In 1963, the Post Office Hotel, the last building standing, also burned to the ground. Nothing remains above ground except the cemetery. Iron-railed grave enclosures, half-buried in fern roots on a steep, beech-forested hillside. Travel writer Peter Janssen has described it as the most atmospheric ghost town site in New Zealand, eerie in a way that doesn't require darkness or imagination. Visitors consistently say it looks like a scene from a horror film, even on a sunny afternoon. The site is now a DOC campsite and the trailhead for the 5-kilometer Old Ghost Road. The ghosts never went anywhere. Number 5. Denniston, the eighth wonder nobody visits. The coal under the Denniston Plateau, 18 kilometers northeast of Westport, was among the highest quality ever mined in New Zealand. The problem was vertical. The plateau sits at the top of an almost sheer hillside, with no road connection to the coast. The solution was the Denniston Incline, a gravity-operated rail system where the weight of descending loaded coal wagons pulled empty ones back up. Contemporary accounts called it the eighth wonder of the world. Around 1,400 people lived on this plateau at its peak. The rock was too hard to grow food, too hard to dig long-drop toilets, too hard to bury the dead conventionally. The fog could settle for weeks. Children worked in the mine alongside adults. A visiting shoe salesman made the journey up once a fortnight, specifically on payday, because that was the only day residents had money to spend. They built brass bands, they built bowling greens, they organized unions. They lasted nearly a century. A best-selling New Zealand novel, published in 2012, was set here. The publisher's description called Denniston a place that makes or breaks those who live there. It was not a metaphor. What remains today? Coal wagons, haulage machinery, the Banbury Arch, a piece of Cornish stonemasonry, DOC walking tracks, and a small museum. A handful of residents still live on the plateau. They inherited something particular from the people who came before them. Number 4. Bullendale, where New Zealand turned on the lights. In February 1886, a small gold mine above Skipper's Canyon, in a rocky gorge in the Richardson Mountains, became the site of New Zealand's first industrial use of electricity. The Phoenix mine had a problem. The creek powering its stamp battery ran dry in summer. The mine's owner, a Dunedin merchant named George Bullen, decided to solve it by generating electricity using a different creek and transmitting the power over a ridge. Nobody in New Zealand had attempted this. Workers dragged tons of equipment up Skipper's Canyon on pack tracks, barely wide enough for a man. Pipes were fixed to a 60-meter cliff face to drive Pelton wheels and dynamos at the base. 2 dynamos generating a maximum of 50 kilowatts combined. A 2-mile copper wire transmission line running over a high ridge. When the system started, the mines inspector observed that very little is yet really known about electricity. It worked. It was the first electrical transmission over a distance in New Zealand, and is described by DOC as close to a world first in international terms. The mine closed for good in 1907. The original 1,885 dynamos could not be removed too heavy for the pack tracks that had barely gotten them in. They remained in the gorge. Here's the wild part. They are still there. In 2022, a replica powerhouse was built around them to preserve the equipment. You can hike in and sleep in the adjacent 4-bunk DOC hut, next to one 40-year-old generating equipment in a gorge most people don't know exists. New Zealand's first electric town. Population currently 0. Number 3. Cromarty and Te Onaroa, the ghost towns at the end of New Zealand. There is no road to this place. There has never been a road to this place. Preservation Inlet Raketuma in Maori is the southernmost fjord in Fiordland National Park. in the southwestern corner of the South Island. The only way to reach it today is by boat or helicopter. In the 1890s, following gold discoveries in the inlet, two settlements were established here, Cromarty and Teonaroa. DOC describes the area as New Zealand's most isolated goldfields. At its peak, Cromarty had three main streets: a butchery, a bakery, a sawmill, a school, and an annual pumpkin-growing competition. The Tarawera Gold Mining and Smelting Company erected a brick blast furnace smelter chimney in 1910 to process the gold. The operation produced nothing of value. Both towns were abandoned by 1914. This fjord had a longer history of European occupation than most of New Zealand. The first shore-based whaling station in the country was established here in 1828 or 1829. Sealers, then whalers, then gold miners, each wave arriving, extracting what they could, and leaving. A lighthouse keeper at nearby Puisegur Point was dismissed for neglecting his watch to work his own private gold claim. A later keeper reportedly burned the lighthouse tower to the ground in 1942 because the revolving beam disturbed his sleep. Today, rusting mining equipment in the regenerating bush, the partly restored Tarawera smelter chimney, and one piece of private land in the middle of Fiordland National Park, the former Cromarty town site, now occupied by a private lodge. In the lodge garden grows a rhododendron. It is a relic of the Kisby Hotel garden, planted in the 1890s. It blooms pink every spring in the wilderness, with no one around to see it. Number 2. Brunner, 186. Children, 37 widows, and one mourning. On 26 March 1896, at 9:30 inches the morning, a coal gas explosion tore through the Brunner mine in the Grey Valley on the west coast. It killed 65 men and boys. It remains the worst workplace disaster in New Zealand history. The accounting afterward was precise. 186 children were left fatherless. 37 women were widowed. 14 elderly parents lost their sole financial support. 2 men sent underground to investigate were pulled out unconscious, having inhaled a suffocating mixture of gases. The mine kept operating. The main Brunner mine was not closed until 1906. Explorer Thomas Brunner had identified coal seams in the area back in 1847. Commercial mining began in 1864. By the 1880s, Brunner was the largest coal producer in New Zealand. At production peak in 1901, 300 families lived on the site. After the mine closed, those families left. Within a generation, the town of Brunnerton had nearly vanished from the landscape. The disaster directly triggered the formation of West Coast Unionism and drove improved workplace safety legislation across the country. What remains today? The Brunner Mine Industrial Site, preserved as a Tohu Wenhua Heritage Area. Beehive coke ovens, intact at the riverbank. Coal wagon relics, a replica suspension bridge across the Grey River, and a memorial bearing the names of all 65 men and boys who died that morning. Some of those names belong to children. Number 1. Waiuta, the town that disappeared in a morning. You drive 21 kilometers up a gravel road into the West Coast bush, following a single lane that climbs the hillside through dense native forest. The road ends at a clearing. There are no signs except a small DOC shelter with information boards. You walk in. The first thing you notice is the silence. Not the silence of empty countryside, the silence of a place that was supposed to be full. There is a grass rectangle where a rugby pitch used to be. The posts are still standing. There are faint outlines in the ground where bowling greens used to be, where a tennis court used to be. At the end of a short path, there is a swimming pool, 30 meters long, bone dry. Weeds growing through cracks in the concrete. No one has demolished it. It just sits there, as if the water is only temporarily absent. This was Waiuta. The mine was established after a gold-bearing quartz reef was discovered here in 1905. By the 1930s, 601 people lived in this community, which had facilities that rivaled towns many times its size. The pool, the bowling greens, tennis courts, a croquet lawn, a whippet racing track. The Prohibition mine shaft reached 879 meters, the deepest on the West Coast. Over its lifetime, the mine produced nearly 750,000 ounces of gold, worth approximately 1.6 billion New Zealand dollars today. On 9 July 1951, the Blackwater ventilation shaft collapsed. The mine flooded. The London-based owners shut it down the same day. Waiuta was a company town in the truest sense. Every house, every job, every reason to be there existed because the mine existed. When the mine closed, there was no reason left. Families came home, packed what they could carry, and left. Buildings were dismantled, timber by timber, and trucked away. 3 months after the collapse, only 20 people remained. A few months after that, 0. The things people could not carry, or chose not to take, or simply forgot are still there today. Here's the detail that stops people cold. In one of the abandoned houses maintained by DOC, someone set the kitchen table. 4 place settings: plates, bowls, cups, and saucers, arranged neatly. Nobody knows who. It was found that way by a visitor sometime after the town emptied. A table set for a meal that was never eaten, in a kitchen where no one has lived since 1951. The swimming pool is still there. The rugby posts are still standing in empty grass. The sealed mine shaft sits fenced on the hill above, 879 meters down to where it all ended. Waiuta is free to visit. You can stay in Waiuta Lodge, a dock hut that holds up to 30 people. And the table, last anyone checked, is still set. The South Island ran its gold and coal economy hard for about a century. And these are the places that paid for it. The one that stays with me is Waiuta, the dry concrete pool, the rugby posts, the table no one ever cleared. If there's a ghost town I missed, put it in the comments. And if this kind of history is your thing, subscribe. There is a lot of South Island that never makes it into the travel guides.